It's working.
We are
Live.
It's a laptop.
Why not? It's easy, guys. Sister Tom.
Hello,
Sister Tom, Sister Martha, how are you? This is for the sister room up here. The sister room. Yeah. Sisters up there. Sisters are everywhere. Oh yeah, let's just move up. Oh yeah, get it.
No, you're the student, I'm the teacher. She said I got a little mixed up.
There's Sister Swan.
You ready to roll? Okay. Good evening, welcome back. So last night, I just want to give a brief review of what we did. We started with the pro-choice, the pro-choice moral arguments. And tonight, we got a friendlier audience for the pro-life moral side. Tomorrow night, we'll have the two sides dialogue with each other. And then on the fourth night, we'll go into the legal question. And then the fifth night, we'll end with more personal stories and discussion. So that's the plan. And so briefly, last night what we did, the first thing, first of all, that I really want to encourage you to kind of look at and get hold of is the idea that abortion is not a religious issue. That is like so important. There's people that are religious and non-religious on both sides of the issue, but it's not a religious issue in and of itself, any more than human trafficking is a religious issue, that slavery was a religious issue, child abuse, any other moral issue. Yes, there's religious people that are against these things that are also against abortion, but abortion is a human rights issue, and it's important to keep that in mind. Just briefly, the pro-choice moral side, first of all, is the idea that only a woman can make the intimate decision whether to carry a pregnancy to term or abort it. It's this instance of pregnancy is happening in her body. This is her sacred space, and no one else can tell her what to do. This is a private decision. It doesn't get any more private than abortion, than pregnancy and the choice to abort or not. So that's her business. Stay out of it. Secondly, the fetus, the general idea is the fetus is not a person anyway. It's biologically human. It's got 46 chromosomes, but it's only a biological thing. It's a plant. It's not a person. Doesn't have consciousness, doesn't have reasoning, doesn't have a sense of self. All the things that we associate here in this room with being a person, of wanting to continue in existence. The embryo, the conceptus, the embryo, doesn't even think about tomorrow. So it has no sense of even wanting to continue in existence. So if it doesn't continue in existence, it's not a big deal. The idea is that personhood is a gradual achievement. It's a gradual achievement. Consciousness comes in slowly. Reasoning develops. You slowly and over time get a sense of yourself, and you gradually become a person. You're not just a person overnight at some point in time, or when sperm meets egg, you don't suddenly have personhood there. That's a gradual achievement. And then last, even if the being in the womb, we use being in the womb, pro-choice likes to say fetus, pro-life likes to say child or baby. When I'm giving you their particular points of view, I'm going to use their terms, but sometimes sort of on neutral territory, I'm just going to say the being in the womb. It's a less loaded word for either side. So even if the being in the womb is a person, Judith Jarvis Thompson tells us the woman has no duty to sustain this being. So again, if somebody comes into your home, starts eating your food, you have the right to throw them out. You have the right, even if you've invited them in. You've invited them in, your friend comes over, and now he's been there for a few weeks and you've decided you've changed your mind. You invited him, but you've changed your mind. You can say, there's the door, get out. It's your house, it's your food, it's your refrigerator, time to leave. So you don't have any duty to sustain people that show up on your private property. And your body, a woman's body, is most certainly her private property. So when she wants somebody to leave, they have to leave. That's even if the being in the womb is a person. And then next, every child should be a wanted child. We don't want unwanted children. That's a sad and terrible thing for any society to have its unwanted children. Not only that, children are so precious, they deserve to be wanted. I mean, who wants to be an unwanted child? So children deserve to be wanted. They have a right to be wanted. And so if there's a situation where they're not wanted or they're not going to be wanted, it's better that they not exist at all. Better for them, better for other children in the family, better for society in general. There's more happiness in the world, and happiness is an important thing. Happiness is an important thing. Lastly, women in society don't just need life. I mean, it's great to be pro-life, and it's nice that you like life and that you're pro-life, but it's not just about life. What matters is quality of life, quality of life, not just life. You know, if you're just laying in a prison somewhere, that's not such a great thing. So, you know, it's nice to talk about life, but what really, really matters is quality of life, that you have a good life, that you have a wanted life, that people love you and care about you. And if that's not going to be the case, then there's really no point in having just plain old life. So that's the a quick review of what we went over in 2 hours last night. And you can see the rest. It is available online. Okay, I want to quickly talk about the concept of false questions, because that's very, very important in debates. And of course, the classic false question that most of us have heard of is the guy that you put on the witness stand and you ask him, have you stopped beating your wife? And it's a yes or no question. And whether he answers yes or no, obviously he's in trouble. Yes, I've stopped beating my wife, Or no, I haven't stopped beating my wife, So either way, it's a false question of a particular type of false question. And then in a great epistemological question is the question, who decides what is right and wrong? Who decides what is right and wrong? Or we hear people say, you know, who decides what, you know, what's true? Who decides? We've all heard that. But it's a false question because truth isn't decided by a who. Truth is something that is. Truth is what is the case. We discover truth. We uncover truth. But you don't create truth. You don't create truth. Truth is. Truth is. So nobody decides what is true. Nobody decides that 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 is 4. Always has been 4. Never will be anything but 4. We discover that truth. But it's not created. Sometimes people want to think the idea that God decides what is true. But God doesn't decide what is true. God is truth. God is truth. I've had certain evangelical Christians say the idea that, well, for instance, rape is bad because God says it's bad. But it's actually the other way around. God says it's bad because it is bad, because God is truth. Sometimes they've told me, well, if God decided tomorrow that rape was good, then rape would be good. It's like, no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. Because it's true in God as truth that rape is something evil and bad. So nobody decides what is true. Truth is. Truth is. So again, that's the idea of a false question. There is no who. We uncover it, we discover it, but there's no who. There's no deciding. And again, in the abortion issue, we noticed yesterday, do you want to bring unwanted children into the world? It's a false question. It's false on a couple of levels. First of all, the idea is, do you want to bring unwanted children into the world? The immediate thought is, well, they're not in the world now. But of course, if a child is in the womb and the womb is in the world, then the child already is in the world. So it's a false question just on that level when you're asked, do you want to bring unwanted children into the world? But it's also false on another thing, on another sense, in that the idea that they're unwanted. Like the minute you're asked somebody, do you want to bring unwanted children? Well, nobody wants to bring unwanted children into the world. I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing. So again, it's sort of like the first question. If you say, well, yes, I want to bring unwanted children into the world, you look like some kind of a moral monster. And if you say, no, I don't want to bring unwanted children into the world, then it looks like you say, well, then abortion is a great thing. So again, you're kind of stuck in this false question. Or the idea of, do you want more suffering here? Do you want more suffering here? Well, nobody wants more suffering here. The idea is, well, if you want more suffering here, there's something wrong with you. If you don't want more suffering here, then of course you're in favor of abortion. And again, you're kind of stuck into this corner. So you don't want to allow someone to force you into the corner of a false question. You want to start to look at a question that you're asked and say, is it a false question? Is it a false choice going on here or not? It's very important to recognize a false question when it's put to you and say, wait a minute. I don't have to choose between, yes, I stopped beating my wife, or no, I didn't stop beating my wife. So watch for those kind of questions in any kind of a moral debate. So the core point of the pro-choice, pro-life is that there's a real child there. This is a real child, a small baby, and it's a person. It's a person. Pro-life wants to say the being in the womb is a small, innocent baby, whether it's wanted or not. That's the core point. Never take your focus off what is it that you want to abort? What is it that you want to get rid of? Pro-life says it's a baby, it's a person, it's just not born yet, it's in a different environment than you and me, looks perhaps different than you and I do, still needs the protection of the woman, but this is absolutely a small person, not just a biological organism. And pro-life asks that we identify with the child, see the being in the womb as one of us, the same ontological dignity that we have, the same essence of dignity that everyone has, regardless of their abilities, the same moral right to life, and therefore should obviously have the same legal rights. And abortion is the deliberate termination of the baby. The deliberate termination of pregnancy is killing the child. And looking at the research, abortion after 20 weeks is painfully killing the child. Painfully killing the child. Pro-life wants to say to pro-choice, you wouldn't do this to a dog or a frog. Like if you saw a small boy like pulling a frog apart in the backyard, you wouldn't like that. You certainly wouldn't even do it to a dog. And yet here, all the way through pregnancy, 40 weeks, abortion is legal in the United States, right to, up to and including the moment of birth. They're saying after 20 weeks, we know this is painfully killing the child. So you're using the word choice, but what is your choice? What choice are you talking about? I mean, choice is a great thing. Choice is great when you go into an ice cream shop. Do you want vanilla, chocolate, strawberry? You've got great choices. Choice is a wonderful thing when you're trying to choose what kind of a profession you want to go into, what you want to do with your life. I mean, those are great choices, and choice is a wonderful word. The American society runs on choice. We run on choice. It's a great thing. But when you get to the issue of pregnancy, what are you choosing? What does choice mean? Well, it means, am I going to kill the child in the womb or am I not? That's the choice. That's what pro-life wants you to take a look at and see clearly. That's the choice you're talking about. And it's not a pretty choice. So let's take a look at the facts about this being in the womb. We know from the moment of conception, something amazing starts happening. You have a growing individual human being. Starts out as a single cell called a zygote, and by a natural and continuous process, and pro-life wants you to look at that continuous process, it will develop into a newborn baby with trillions of cells in 9 months. And the human being, the new human being, though it receives half of its chromosomes from each parent, has its own unique genetic code. This thing that's growing there has its own unique genetic code. So yes, it's in the woman's body, but it's clearly and distinctly not her body. It has a totally unique genetic code. And therefore, it absolutely shouldn't be called a fertilized ovum or a fertilized egg. We often hear that expression. but it's not a fertilized egg because it's neither the egg nor the sperm. It's a totally new and unique being at the beginning of its existence. So let's just take a little bit of a look here. We're told it's a blob. So let's take a look at the first trimester blob, the first 6 weeks. By 4 days, long before you know you're pregnant, by 4 days, with a microscope, we can tell whether it's a boy or a girl. By 4 days. Well, your thought may be sometimes if you're pro-choice, well, it doesn't look like a boy or a girl. Well, it does, obviously. Because if you look at it, you can tell whether it's a boy or a girl. Does it look like a boy or a girl at, say, 3 years old? No. But a 3-year-old boy or girl doesn't look like a 90-year-old boy or girl. So looks change. Obviously, we're far more familiar with what people look like outside the womb than we are inside. But if a womb had a window, we'd be just as familiar with the inside as we are with the outside. It's just a lack of our ability to see. So at 4 days, we already can tell if it's a boy or a girl, but obviously it's already a boy or girl immediately at conception. We just don't have the technology to see that. But by 4 days, we can see it. At 18 days, the heart begins to beat, which was one of our signs of knowing whether someone is dead or alive at the other end of life. Now, why the heart beating at the beginning of life doesn't tell you that somebody's there, but why it is a sign that somebody's there at the end of life is kind of an interesting question. But we have the heart beating at 18 days, 19 days, the eyes begin to form, 30 days, spinal cords, brain, spinal cord, everything's going on here. And again, note, the being in the womb and the mother do not exchange blood. This being has its own blood system, okay? And the important thing at 45 days or 6.5 weeks, there's ECG waves, which means conscious experience is possible after this date. This is very, very early. Conscious experience is possible. Now, it seems to pro-life that if conscious experience is possible, somebody must be there to have that conscious experience. Somebody's got to be home. There's got to be a person there. A plant is not capable of conscious experience. There's got to be somebody there. And it's not a cat or a dog, because we know it definitely turns into a person. So pro-life says if there's conscious experience possible at 45 days, then somebody's probably there. So here you have 3.5 weeks. And again, choice is going to say, this doesn't look like a human person. Well, yes, it does. It doesn't look like a born human person. It happens to look like a pre-born human person. All of us in this room at one point in time looked like this. But hopefully, most of us don't look like we looked when we were born either. And most of us no longer don't look like we did maybe, say, at 2 years. So we've changed a lot. And this is what we look like. But even at this stage, there were individual differences between you and me, even at this stage. It's not like this is kind of a cookie cutter thing, and then individual characteristics come later. There is individual characteristics even at this stage. We're just not used to seeing them and picking up on them. I have face blindness, so I can't even pick up on them now, the difference between you and you most of the time until I know people for a long time. So this is just a matter of our problem, not the problem with the being in the womb. It's already got its own individual stuff going on, its own individual personality happening, its own genetic code, its own blood system. At 6 weeks, everything is pretty much in place here. Everything's going. At 7 to 13 weeks, you're still in the first trimester. Now, this is when most abortions are done. Most abortions are done between 6 and 12 weeks. At 7 weeks, you have a totally well-proportioned small human being. And by that, they mean what we think of as looking like a human being that's born. So obviously it looked, it was a well-proportioned small human being even before this point, but not what we're familiar with seeing. Has all the familiar external features, including, and this is very interesting, at 7 weeks, an unmistakably what we consider human face, an unmistakably human face. At 8 weeks, everything is already present that will be found in the full-term baby. At 8 weeks, this is your primary time for almost all abortions. 8 weeks, everything is there. 9 and 10 weeks, if the forehead is touched, he turns his head away, puckers up his brow and frowns, has full use of his arms, and the entire body is sensitive to touch. The entire body is sensitive to touch. And this is at a point where we're saying nobody's there. But pro-life says, we think somebody is there. Because if the entire body is sensitive to touch, somebody has got to be experiencing that touch. At 13 weeks, the being in the womb can kick his legs, turn his feet, curl and fan his toes. This is when we have thumb sucking for the first time. And again, most abortions are done at this time, between 6 and 12 weeks. A little under 1 million a year here in the United States. So moving into the second trimester, you can see here 14 weeks the kidneys are producing urine. 16 weeks baby sex is now detectable by ultrasound, and ultrasound is really changing the view of abortion in the United States, because now there's so many pictures. People have an ultrasound and the next 2 minutes later it's on Facebook, so everybody can see it now. So it is changing the view of what's happening in the world. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't know if you remember the old ultrasound, you got this blur, but the ultrasounds now are 3D pictures. Whatever isn't there, the computer helps fill it in now. So you get an amazing 3D picture of the baby in utero, and that's at 19 weeks. And at 19 weeks, baby can now survive outside the womb. Now, wait a minute, it's not a person, but when a preemie is born, we all know it's a baby. And pro-life says, look at that. At 19 weeks, baby can survive outside the womb. If baby is born at 19 weeks, takes that first breath, what does he or she become here in the United States? Becomes a person, but what else does he become? Becomes a citizen. So at 19 weeks, baby takes one breath. Baby is a citizen of the United States of America and clearly and totally recognizes a person. Pro-life says, what's going on here? What's going on here for the next 20 weeks if baby stayed inside and had no rights, just because he happened to be inside instead of outside? 23 weeks, 24 weeks, things are developing, things are becoming more clarified. 27 weeks, baby's doing practice breathing. During this time period, second and third trimester in the United States, it's a small percentage of the abortions, small percentage, but number-wise, we're looking at 20,000 late-term abortions a year. 20,000 late-term abortions a year. And interestingly enough, when I was at the Princeton Life and Choice Conference in 2010, put on by Peter Singer and Francis Kissling, most of the 200 pro-choice people there were extremely uncomfortable with abortion after 19 or 20 weeks, halfway through pregnancy. Most pro-choice people were starting to be in agreement, at least on the moral issue, if not the legal issue, but on the moral issue, they were in agreement with most of the pro-life people there. So that's something to look at and to be aware of. But we still have 20,000 late-term abortions. Being in the womb at 11 weeks, baby here, 12 to 16 weeks. At this point, clearly recognizable, and 18 weeks. So everything starts happening. Fingernails start growing at 28 weeks. At 34 weeks, baby's now considered late preterm. Healthy babies born at this stage. And at 37 weeks, baby is considered full term. So even though most pregnancies go all the way to 40 weeks, Baby's considered full term at 36, 37 weeks because the lungs are perfectly fine and there's really any problems at that point. And yet all through this time, all the way through 40 weeks, abortion is still available in the United States up to and including the moment of birth. And keep in mind that when we had partial birth abortion, which some people want to go back to, the point of taking the baby and turning it around and bringing it out feet first and bum comes out in the back and keeping the head inside was because if the head comes out and baby takes one breath, what happens? Becomes a citizen of the United States of America, declared a person totally protected by law, totally protected. But if you keep the head inside, you can stick the scissors into its brain, clip its spinal cord, suck out the brains, and then pull the head out. And that's legal. And pro-life says, why? Why is this legal? Why is this legal? It's obviously not done for the life of the mother, because all you have to do is pull the baby's head out and then send her on her way, send baby in the other direction, save both. So it's not done for the life of the mother ever. It's important to know that. Late-term abortions like that are never done for the life of the mother because the baby can just be taken out. So it's obviously done for another reason. And pro-life says why? Why is this available when the being in the womb can survive outside? So I'd like to share with you the idea of the continuum argument. And that's the idea that the life of a human person is a single continuum from before birth, and all the way through. You start out, you're conceived, then you've got all this time before birth and after birth, and development continues. But life is one continuum of the same person. You're the same person in all phases of your life. Birth is merely a transition place from one place to another. But if you go back in time, from however old you are now to back when you were 10, and then when you were 3, and the moment of your birth, and then you go a minute before you were born, you're the same person. That's what pro-life wants you to know. You were the same person. Of course you were. Well, what about a minute before that? Well, what about an hour before you were born? Well, what about the day before you were born? Well, how about the week before? And if you go back, all the way to conception, there's no point in time where you suddenly became a person, where you suddenly became you. It was you all along. It was you all along. Birth is merely a transition, and birth certainly doesn't transform a non-person into a person, which is what the Supreme Court suggested. Now, the interesting thing, if you remember yesterday, is Singer and Tooley agree with this. They say, of course, birth doesn't change anything. It's just a difference of location. Of course, there's no difference. So they're in agreement with us. They just say you can kill it before and after. And we're suggesting that maybe that's not such a great idea. But the Supreme Court said that birth was a huge change, that something amazing happens between in utero and outside, that you go from being a non-person to a person. Continuum argument says, I don't think so. There doesn't seem to be any point where anything magical happens, just a single continuum. I want you to take a look at the term unborn. For years, we've talked about the unborn, right, in the pro-life movement. And all of a sudden, somebody says, why are you calling this being in the womb unborn? It's not unborn. Un implies something that should be there that's not, right? Like you're undocumented, you're unwilling, you're unbecoming, you're unsure. You ought to be sure, but you're unsure. You'd like to be clear, but you're unclear. You'd like to be happy, but you're unhappy. That's something that should be there that's not. The child in the womb is not un anything. Why are you calling me unborn? I'm not supposed to be born. I'm just preborn. I'm just not born yet, but I'm not unborn. And it's very important to have the terminology really, really correct. This is a preborn child, not an unborn child. And if you just leave this little boy or girl alone, it will become a born child. It's not on anything. There's nothing missing with the being in the womb. It's not supposed to be born. It's not supposed to be born. And to just keep that clearly in mind. continuum argument says I was once a preborn baby in my mother's womb, and then I was a born baby, then a toddler, then I was a 4-year-old, then a 6-year-old. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Little children understand this. How often do you hear little children say, I was once in mommy's tummy. I used to be in mommy's tummy. They have a clear understanding of that they're the same person now that was in mommy's tummy. They understand the continuum argument. I was once in mommy's tummy. Then you become a teenager and on to old age. The same person. The same person. Same person. And if you think of babies that are born prematurely, you see this. It's the same person. They may have stayed in another 20 weeks, but they're the same person that they were just before birth. But aren't there differences? I mean, come on, there's differences. I mean, if you look at these pictures and you go back to the embryo and you look at that being that doesn't seem to look anything like you or I, there's differences. And pro-choice is saying there's huge differences. And well, yes, there are differences. And there are 4 differences. And I'm going to suggest to you that there's only 4 differences. And I'd love for you to tell me if there's another one. So far, I've put that, Dr. Schwartz and I have put that challenge out to pro-life students, to pro-choice students, to a lot of people. Can you come up with another difference besides these 4? And so far, we've never had anyone come up with another one. The younger one is smaller. There's size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. The acronym is the SLED. And this was put together by Dr. Schwartz in The Moral Question of Abortion back in 1990. The younger one is smaller. The level of development, the younger one is less developed. The environment, the surroundings change from the womb to outside the womb, from one part of the world to another. And dependency, the level or degree of dependency changes. So the preborn baby is smaller, less developed, in a different environment, and far more dependent than a born child. Although a born child is still pretty dependent, okay? But obviously more intimately dependent than outside. This baby outside can be given to somebody else to care for, where inside it's a one-to-one sort of relationship. But this is it. Size, level of development, environment, dependency. Smaller, less developed, different environment, more dependent. But that's it. The most important thing to think about those 4 things is they're not morally significant. On a moral question, they're not morally significant. If you are bigger than me or smaller than me, it doesn't change how much of a person we are. I still have the dignity of a person if I'm smaller than you. Size is morally irrelevant when it comes to persons and dignity and how you should treat somebody. You know, a 4-year-old has just as much dignity on the ontological level as a 40-year-old does, but usually they're a lot smaller. But there's the same level of dignity. Size means very little. In terms of persons, it means nothing. In terms of how you treat somebody. Oh, I'll treat you better if you're bigger. I mean, can you imagine somebody saying, the bigger you get, the better I'll treat you? Because the bigger you are, the more of a person you are. Obviously, size is irrelevant. It has nothing to do with how you are as a person. Level of development. Well, I'm more developed than my grandchildren, I hope. I'm more developed in all sorts of ways, and they're more developed than their 1-month-old baby cousin. But we're all persons. I can't say, well, you're less developed than I am, so I can take your kidneys and give them to somebody else. Because, you know, if you're less developed, we don't have to treat you like a person. Well, of course we have to treat you. Development has never been a condition of being a person in the United States of America and being a citizen. How developed you are. So that's not an issue when it comes to how we treat somebody morally. You're a person regardless of how developed you are. And then there's your environment, which obviously changes from the womb to outside, but our environment changes throughout our life. And some people say, well, the environment in the womb, that's different. That's totally dependent. It's totally dependent. I mean, everything has to be there. You know, the oxygen and food has to be gotten in. And it's a totally controlled environment. But picture our astronauts when they were on the moon. Picture our astronauts when they were on the moon. They were totally dependent on everything. It was just like being in the womb. Totally dependent on everything. But we didn't think they weren't persons because of their level of dependency. They were still persons. And so it's important to see that your surroundings and your degree of dependency, those two things don't change you from a person to a non-person or the other way around. You're still a person. So these four things seem, as far as I can tell, to be the only difference between the person in the womb and the person outside. And these things aren't morally significant. They're physically significant, and they have to do with how much care somebody needs. The interesting thing is they start to reverse again in old age. So we could be in trouble at the other end, too. So in old age, your body often starts to shrink. You start to get smaller. Your development, mental and physical acuity may decrease. Your environment certainly may change again. If you wind up in a nursing home, it's certainly back into an extremely dependent situation where your degree of dependency also changes. So we see changes in the opposite direction at the other spectrum of life. But again, that doesn't change personhood. That doesn't change personhood. So is it really a small person? Let's remember the arguments of Warren and Tooley. They said the being in the womb is not a person because it lacks these essential traits. So let's go back to the pro-choice argument for a minute. Because, you know, okay, the SLED looks good. It's a person, but whoa, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. You know, let's not get carried away. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have reasoning. It does not have self-motivated activity. It has no capacity to communicate. And this idea of self-awareness and wanting to continue in existence. Like, what about these things? What about these things? I mean, these things have to count for personhood. These things have to count for personhood. I mean, here we all are, reasoning, thinking. Anybody not conscious? Anybody getting tired? Anybody not conscious? Good. So, I mean, what are you going to just say? These things don't count? What happens to these things? Because while the fetus may have a few of these things, the embryo and the zygote certainly doesn't have these things. And nobody, pro-life isn't claiming that they do. I mean, there's nobody claiming that at 4 days, when you can look under a microscope and see whether it's a little boy or a little girl, nobody's claiming that little boy or little girl has consciousness, reasoning, self-motivation, communication skills, self-awareness, or a desire to be here tomorrow. No pro-life person is claiming that. So what are you going to do with this? Because this is how we see persons. This is how we see our neighbor. So what happens to this? Well, life wants to say, you are confusing being a person with functioning as a person. You are confusing being a person with functioning as a person. That list, consciousness, reasoning, self-awareness, that's functioning as a person. We can function as persons. But functioning presupposes being. Functioning presupposes being. A tree, a stone, a tomato, a blob of tissue, these can't suddenly start to function as a person. Only a person can begin to function as a person. I want you to think about that for a minute. Only a person can begin to function as a person. You've got to have the being of a person there before functioning can come in. There's got to be the foundation there. The being has to be there. A tomato will never begin to function as a person, no matter how long you leave it in the womb. It's never going to be a person. It's never going to function as a person. In order to function as a person, there has to be the being of a person. Functioning as a person is what you can do. What you can do. Consciousness, reasoning, deliberation, explicit sense of self. Well, we ask, when did you get these? And there's various points in utero or outside of utero when you got these. When you got these. But pro-life wants you to look at the fact that there has to be a you there to get these things. It's like, did you get the letter I sent last week? Did you get the letter? Well, there has to be a you to get the letter. You know, there has to be a you there. So if you get these things, if you get the ability to communicate, deliberate, reason, there has to be somebody there to get these things. And that's what pro-life wants you to recognize. There has to be a you there. Being a person is what you really are, whether you can function or not. And there can't be a partial you. There can be partial functioning. Functioning can come in gradually. You can have partial abilities to reason. You can be partially conscious. When you wake up in the morning, there's that moment where you're partially conscious, and then you're fully conscious. But you can't have a partial person. You can't have a half a person or a quarter of a person. And that's what pro-life wants you to take a look at. Don't confuse functioning as a person with the being of a person. So let's take a look at times where the person outside the womb doesn't function as a person under total anesthesia, person with severe dementia doesn't have all of those possibilities of reasoning, person in a coma. The newborn baby has very little, they have consciousness, but certainly their reasoning abilities are very limited. Teenagers have very limited reasoning abilities most of the time. So you can take a look at those things. They have a lot more self-awareness, but very low on the reasoning. Newborn baby and the preborn baby, they don't have functioning. None of these people are functioning. But when you're under total anesthesia, it doesn't dawn on anybody that you're not a person. Oh, he's under anesthesia. We can kill him now. She's under anesthesia. Oh, my friend down the street needs a new heart. Great. This thing is under anesthesia. It's no longer a person. We can harvest organs. No. But a person under anesthesia, or a human being under anesthesia, is still fully a person. Nobody questions that for a minute. So it's important to take a look at that. Functioning comes in gradually. Functioning comes in gradually. But being is always fully there. And that's what's being confused. That's what's being confused. So this is probably a good point to take a quick break. We've gone about 50 minutes. So why don't we take a...
Wait a minute, before you take a break, can you tell them about the book table again?
Oh, the book table.
Okay. I've been teaching this book for years and years in ethics. And for those of you who are wishing you could tell people, you know, you could get the YouTubes, but that's 10 hours of watching YouTubes. If you might want to have the book. So there are copies of the book, Understanding Abortion from Mixed Feelings to Rational Thought in the back there. They're $25. If you want to give a check, it make it out to Dr. Schwartz, because he sent these books. Many of you don't know this fact. When authors bring around books, we don't have books free. We have to pay for those books. So we get them at a discount, but we still have to pay a huge hunk of money for those books. So you just need to bear that in mind. So it's not as if we get them free and why don't we give them to you free? Because we don't get them free. Okay, and they were also on display there, wonderful books, children's books written by Kiki Latimer. And there's a set there that are about the work of she and her parish in Haiti. She wrote these books about that experience of helping Haitians after the earthquake. Beautiful books. So take a look at the books during the break.
Okay, so take a couple of minutes and stretch and we'll come back. Thank you. back and sit down. And then I'm going to leave time questions. We'll have some time for questions. What's that? Oh, microphone, thank you. There we go. Are we ready to go? Are we back on? All right. So the first point of pro-life is that it's a person, that this is a small person, it's a baby, just like the born baby, the preborn baby is just as much of a person, and that we should pay attention to it, identify with it, not forget it when we get caught up in the quality of life of the woman. They're dead. And so it's wrong for that reason. But not only that, abortion is wrong because it's the direct killing of an innocent person. The direct killing. And if it's wrong to kill a born person, it's wrong to kill a preborn person. And so pro-life asks you then to take a look at what we have here in the life or death brochure, the methods of abortion. The methods of abortion. Because last night we looked at Planned Parenthood's description of abortion. And over again, in each description, they said the woman has some anesthesia and the cervix is gently opened, and then some utensils of some sort or another, or suction devices are put in there, and there is what Planned Parenthood is calling the gentle emptying of the uterus. The gentle emptying of the uterus. And pro-life says, wait a minute, let's take a look at the pictures. Let's take another look at the procedure. Is this the gentle emptying of the uterus? Is it fair to call it that? Is it fair to call it that? And if you look at this, the pictures are gruesome. A lot of times people don't like to look at the pictures of abortion. They're very disturbing, and I can understand that. They're very, very disturbing pictures. But it's very interesting. Pro-choice says, and even just a lot of well-meaning people sort of in between, don't want to see those pictures. Don't want to see those pictures. I agree with the procedure, but I don't want to see those pictures because they hurt people's feelings. And they're just disturbing in a decent society. We shouldn't show pictures like this. But pro-life says, that's interesting on a number of counts. But it was interesting after Nazi Germany, when the pictures from Auschwitz and Buchenwald started to come out, a lot of decent people said, don't show these pictures. These are disgusting pictures. Decent people shouldn't have to see bodies piled up like garbage, human bodies piled up like garbage. And the exact same thing is being said about these pictures. People shouldn't have to see what looks like human bodies piled up like garbage. And yet pro-life says, wait a minute, you say this procedure is okay. Would you mind seeing a bunch of kidneys piled up if you needed your kidney removed? Would that bother you all that much? I don't think so. Why does this bother you, pro-life asks? Why does it bother you? Well, because it looks like a baby. That's why it bothers us. It looks like a baby. But it's the gentle emptying of the uterus, pro-choice tells us. So we've got two conflicting things here. Which is the truth? Which is the truth? Suction aspiration or the suction curettage. This is the early abortion that's done between 8 and 12 weeks, where the suction apparatus is put in, the cervix is opened. The abortionist runs the tip of this thing along the surface of the uterus, causing the baby to be dislodged and sucked into the tube, either whole or in pieces. The amniotic fluid, the placenta, and the other body parts are then also sucked out and collected in the jar. And it's very important what the attending nurse has to do in any abortion is after everything is sucked out, if it's any kind of a legitimate abortion clinic, they have to reassemble the parts on a paper towel to make sure they got all the parts. You can't have a leg or an arm or a head or something left inside the woman because that can cause an infection. So the parts are put back together. So that's why when you look in here and you see these parts, that's what the attending nurse has to do, is put the parts together just to make sure everything's been gotten out. And I think rightly pro-life can ask, is this the gentle emptying of the uterus? Is that what it is? This is basically how it's done. This is the little guy is in there, heart is beating, all systems are go, and this thing is just put in there. Things are kind of ripped apart and pulled out. And again, the attending nurse puts it together on a paper towel to make sure all the parts are there. Is this the gentle emptying of the uterus? I think that's a fair question. I think it's a fair question whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. Is that a fair description of what abortion is? These are the abortions where there's 1 million done a year in the United States. So later we're going to take a look at the numbers as well. So let's go back to yesterday's violinist argument. Judith Jarvis Thompson told us that, you know, if you're kidnapped and knocked unconscious and hooked up to a famous violinist, and now you wake up, not just any old violinist, but this famous one, you have no duty to sustain this person's life. That's the argument. The child is in there, made itself at home, in a woman's body. That's nice. If she wants to keep it in there, well, that's a kindness. That's okay. No, that's a nice thing to do. But she has no duty to do that. Again, somebody barges into your house, or you invite them into your house, and they start eating all your food. If you let them stay and continue eating your food, that's fine. But if at any time you change your mind, it's your house, your food, your refrigerator, you can show them the door. You don't have a right, you don't have a duty to sustain them, and if you don't have a duty, they don't have a corresponding right to stay. But we want to take a look at this. This is a reply to the violinist argument. Maybe you do have a duty to stay plugged in. It's not just a given that you don't. So first of all, this isn't a stranger. The child in the womb is not a stranger. It's your child. It's your child. You haven't woken up attached to a famous unknown violinist. Somebody hasn't walked into your house that you don't know. This is your child. This is a relative. This is somebody that you're biologically connected to. Like, wait a minute. But let's say it is a stranger. Somebody wanders into your house, might have some right to being kept alive. We do have some duty to help people in distress, don't we? I mean, in general, civilized society, going back to Gert's rules, don't we have some duty to help somebody in distress? I mean, you take a walk in the woods and you come across somebody who's disabled, who has fallen and broken their leg. Don't you have some duty to try to get them some help? Well, maybe if they weigh 400 pounds and it's 200 miles to help, there's not much you can do. But what if they weigh 30 pounds and it's only 500 feet to help? At some point you have some duty to do something. And not only do you have a duty, but if somebody finds out you didn't do it, you could be considered negligible. For instance, you look outside. I was driving one day through Wakefield, Rhode Island, and I saw a small 2-year-old child walking down the street all by himself. Cars were going by. Nobody seemed to think they had any duty to stop. The child was obviously not accompanied by anybody. And so it dawned on me, maybe I have a duty to stop. So I pulled over and said, hello, little guy, let's see if we can find out where you came from. And we went to the first house where mom was talking on the phone, and the little guy had figured out that for the first time how to open the screen door, go down the steps, and take a walk down the road. Now, I had a duty to stop. It's as simple as that. Or somebody had a duty to stop. Okay, so we do have a duty to help people in distress, and we recognize that in law. I mean, if somebody dies, let's say in an abandoned house, and it becomes clear that, oh, you knew they were in there, that they'd fallen, that they were starving to death, oh, you knew they were in there, and you didn't bother to tell anybody, you know, enjoy your time in jail. You know, we're going to hold you responsible. Why didn't you tell somebody? Why didn't you call 911? We do have a duty to help people in distress. But, you know, okay, even if you have a right to throw the stranger out of your house. We talked about Joe, he's come for pizza, he's overstayed his welcome, you decide you want him out. Well, maybe you could throw him out. There's the door, get out. It's my apartment, my place, I'm sick to death of you, get out. Makes sense, right? Maybe he's becoming a nuisance. Maybe he smells, you know. There's the door, get him out. Maybe you have a right to do that. But you don't have a right to chop him up first. You don't have a right to chop Joe up and then throw him out. But that's what abortion is. You don't just remove the baby to another location. You don't say out. In partial birth abortion, baby is taken all the way out except for the head. Now, if you follow the violinist argument, you just pull baby the rest of the way out and send him packing off to the incubator. But that's not what's done. What's done is scissors are put into the skull, snip the spinal cord, suck out the brains. You can't do that to Joe just because he's eating your pizza and you want him out of your house. So the analogy of the violinist thing just doesn't apply to what we see in these pictures. It just doesn't apply. This isn't unplugging. This is not unplugging yourself from somebody. This is chopping somebody up. And that's a different thing. That's a different thing altogether. So again, also, let's say you're not going to chop Joe up. You're not going to chop Joe up, but you want him out. You want him out. He's homeless. He smells. He eats too much. He's been here for 4 weeks. Enough is enough. You want him out. So get out. I'm not going to chop you up. I'm a nice person. I'm not going to chop you up. Get out. But it's minus 40 degrees outside. It's minus 40 degrees outside. And you know full well that even if you don't chop Joe up, as soon as you throw him out, for no reason other than the fact that you don't like how he smells and he's eating some of your pizza, I mean, that's your only real reason. He's an inconvenience. He's not a threat to your life. He's an inconvenience. But if you throw him out into the 40 degrees, he will die. Do you have a right to do that? I mean, can't you just kind of hold on until it's, April or May and throw him out then when it's a little bit warmer outside and he has a chance of surviving? I mean, do you have the moral right to throw somebody out into 40-degree weather? Pro-life says no. Supreme Court says no. Supreme Court of this land, if you threw somebody out of your house into 40-degree weather and they died, you're going to be charged with something, negligible homicide or manslaughter or something. So our laws are going to say, no, you can't do this. You can't do this. So pro-life says abortion is not just unplugging the violinist. It's not just, and even if you want to, it's not unplugging, it's chopping and killing and then throwing out. But even just removal of the person isn't allowed once you're born. So take a look at that. Quality of life argument, which we talked quite a bit about last night. Quality of life for the woman in society are absolutely worthy goals. Absolutely. I mean, women have a right to quality of life. Children have a right to happiness and being wanted and quality of life, absolutely. And other siblings have a right to quality of life, and certainly society as a whole. I mean, is anybody here, as a true Christian, not want quality of life? We all want quality of life. We work towards that all the time. They're absolutely worthy goals. The question is, how do you reach those goals? How do you reach those goals? Do we kill a small child in the womb to reach this goal? Do we kill a small child to reach this goal? Would you kill a born person to reach this goal? Would you kill a born person to reach the goal of quality of life? Don't bring an unwanted child into the world, but the child is already in the world. The child is already in the world. The womb is in the world and the child is in the womb. So the child is already in the world. It's way too late, pro-life says, to start asking, should we bring an unwanted child or a child into the world? It's already here. Just that if we put you in a box and we can't see you, that doesn't mean you're not here. Being able to see somebody isn't what makes somebody here. It's whether they're here or not. And the being in the womb is clearly here. They're clearly here. So the idea of not bringing an unwanted child into the world, they're already in the world. They're already in the world. And we need to take a look at that. Quality of life for the woman, yes, she deserves quality of life. She absolutely deserves quality of life. But not at the expense of someone else's life. And that's the thing. Pro-life wants you to keep your eye on what's being aborted. Don't lose sight of what's being aborted. Because all these issues, yes, they're important. They're absolutely important. And you can lose sight, if you lose sight of what the being in the womb is, then these other issues look huge and important, and they are, but not as important as this little person whose heart is beating. And that's what pro-life wants you to never let go of. Identify with it, focus on it. The child is already here. That's the problem. It's very interesting. All of the methods of abortion make sure that they're, as best as possible, except for the saline abortions in the past, they all want to make sure that there is not a live child. That there is not a live child. A live child is considered a complication of abortion in the literature. A complication of abortion in the literature. A born child, a live child, a live birth. So it's clear from the methods that they know full well that the child is already in the world. They know full well that the child is already in the world, and that's the problem. So the pro-life moral position is summary. Abortion is wrong because the being in the womb is a person. This is the only issue in the world, the only moral issue where somebody decided to say, we have this idea of a biological human thing over here, biological, but not a person. There's no other issue where you see those two things separated. And pro-life says, no, you're not going to continue to separate those. It's biologically human and it's a person. And don't confuse being and functioning. We'll grant you it doesn't function like a person, but it is a person. It is a person because it can start to function like a person. And only a person can begin to function like a person. Abortion is wrong because it is direct killing. Abortion is wrong because it causes pain to the being in the womb, even if it's not a person. Can you imagine if somebody told you their dog was pregnant? Now, I just thought about this a few days ago. Their dog was pregnant. Their beautiful, beautiful dog was pregnant with a beautiful litter of puppies. And usually they have the dog has puppies and they sell the puppies. And they're worth a lot of money, you know, hybrid, or what do they call the purebred dogs. But this year the person has decided they don't want to deal with puppies. They don't want to deal with puppies. So tomorrow morning they're taking their dog for an abortion and they're having all the puppies killed. There would be an outrage. You don't kill purebred puppies, right? You don't kill purebred puppies, golden retrievers. They're beautiful little golden retrievers. Well, they're not dogs yet. They're only potential dogs. So we're going to have dog abortions. I don't know if they ever do dog abortions. I've never heard of anyone having dog abortions with beautiful purebred golden retrievers. Okay. Animal rights. You can't do that to an unborn golden retriever. That's horrible. That's horrible. So we see this even with animal rights. Abortion is wrong. And then there's the idea of pain. Then you bring in the idea of pain, which Dr. Suninan says there is definitely pain at 19 weeks, definitely pain. But I know at one point in time in England, embryonic research was stopped, I believe, at 14 days. At 14 days, embryonic research was stopped because the spinal cord and brain was present. And they felt there was the possibility of pain at 14 days. This is long before most women even know they're pregnant. Way before abortions are done, weeks and weeks later. Most abortions being done between 8 and 12 weeks. So the possibility of pain, even if it's not a person, there's no anesthesia given to the being in the womb during these late-term abortions. There's no anesthesia being given. And then last, they say abortion is wrong because there does exist a duty to give sustenance, both before and after birth. The issue of pain, definitely pain at 20 weeks, definitely pain. Brain, nerves and brain functioning between 8 and 13 weeks. So it's wrong to cause pain. When you go back to Gert's rules, and we're certainly a society that believes in animal rights, I mean, if you're found kicking a dog around, you can go to jail. Just kick your dog around, never mind rip its legs off or something. Just beat your dog a little bit and you can go to jail for that. Okay? Start ripping your dog's legs off and you're going to be in really big trouble. So it's wrong to cause pain even if it's not a person, if it's any kind of a sentient being. And again, we go back to Gert's rules. In any kind of a decent society, do not cause pain, do not cause suffering, do not cause harm. So if we have fetal surgery, and fetal surgery is one of the biggest things and preemies, that certainly shows us that there's fetal pain, that there's reactions. And I don't know if any of you have seen this picture before, and the little guy who was born later. But it's just an amazing picture. Did anyone ever see the show House years ago about the grouchy doctor? But they actually used this footage in one of the episodes of House where he said, you know, he was basically trying to talk this woman into an abortion, but she wanted to try to carry it to term and there was some problem and they decided to do fetal surgery. And at one point in the episode with House, again, they use this and the little guy reached out and grabs House's finger and you see his whole attitude, everything shifts, everything changes, somebody in there, clearly a person. So that's what pro-life asks you to identify with. I'd like to open it up to some questions. Take a breath. You guys like this side, right? See, you like this side. Yes.
Well, in late-term abortion, I mean, they usually inject the baby with potassium chloride, I think, which stops the heart.
They stop the heart.
That way the baby's never born alive. That's
right.
Get around
right.
law.
Yeah, they definitely don't want live birth, so they do stop if they can't suck out the brains, they stop the heart.
Yep.
Yeah.
To that false question where the second part, do you want to bring more suffering here? How specifically would you target that part? Say they didn't say anything about bringing an unwanted child into the world. How would you target that second part? About
bringing more suffering into the world? Well, I would say, first of all, abortion is a form of suffering. I mean, it's certainly suffering to the being in the womb. Like I said, even if it's not a person, even if it's a golden retriever, there's some kind of suffering going on there, especially at the late term, and even early by towards the end of the first trimester, we're seeing more and more. It's just a matter of technology. The technology is moving farther and farther, back in time in the womb. So the chance, I mean, we're talking 19 weeks. There's definitely pain. So you are adding to suffering. But later we're also going to talk about the suffering that abortion gives women. So the idea that abortion ends suffering is simply a false thing. Once conception has occurred, whether a woman carries the baby to term and keeps it, carries it to term and places it for adoption, suffers a miscarriage, or chooses abortion, it doesn't matter which one of those four things she chooses, her life will never be the same. Her life will never be the same. We see that over and over and over again. It's not like deleting a file. See, people think of abortion, you're just going to delete the file and you don't think about the filing. It just doesn't work that way. We're not programmed that way. People don't forget about abortion. Abortion doesn't end the suffering. Over and over again, women who have been raped, who have been pushed into having abortions after being raped, have said it was like being raped all over again. We hear statements from women who've raped. First the rapist raped me, then the abortionist did. I had one violent act and then I had another violent act. See, we think of abortion as ending suffering. It doesn't end suffering. It's a form of suffering. It's a form of violence. I mean, if you look at the pictures in here, this is violence. Violence doesn't end suffering. Violence certainly against an innocent person doesn't end suffering. So it's a false question. It says, do you want more suffering in the world? Well, nobody wants more suffering in the world. But the idea that abortion ends suffering is simply a false answer. It doesn't end suffering. It just adds to the misery. Yes.
I was wondering if you addressed the breast cancer link at all to abortion.
That has gone back and forth, and there doesn't seem to be any specific thing that we know yet. Anything that's definable. I mean, it seemed like it was for a while that there was a connection between abortion and breast cancer, and then it looked like some of that data was fudged or wasn't clear. So I think that it's still open-ended as to whether there's a connection between the two. But there is apparently some kind of connection between giving birth to a child and that child's, I believe, some kind of antibodies or something stay in the woman's system, stay in the woman's body for up to 40 years and help fight cancer later in life. And that those things aren't there if you abort. So there is some interesting connection there, but I'm not that clear on that research. Yes.
What can you comment on the, like I've heard there's research where a woman who's had an abortion all of a sudden has a lot of problem bringing a baby to term.
Right.
Like they become unsuitable. Like what can you say about that?
Okay, so when you're pregnant, you've got the womb, baby's in there like you saw in the pictures, and then the cervix is there, and it's like a vice grip. It's a muscle, it's squeezed tight to keep baby in. Okay? Now, and you can picture this with a young woman too. Okay, this is squeezed tight to keep baby in. But what happens in an abortion is you go in there and you stuff something in there to slowly start to pry that cervix open when it's meant to stay tight as a vice grip for the next 9 to 7 months, let's say, or 8 months. You pry those muscles open, okay? And then you go in and you dig everything out. Those muscles get weakened when you do that. They're being pried open when they're meant to stay closed. So what we've often seen is in subsequent pregnancies, that's just not as tight as it should be. It's not as closed. It's not the vice grip it's meant to be. And usually around the 3rd month, when baby and everything in their uterus starts to gain weight, it's just too weak to hold everything in, and you wind up with a miscarriage. Yeah, so that's been the problem, is that those muscles are weakened for subsequent pregnancies. There's also the problem with scarring. They go in there with a curette and they scrape around and dig around. And then so you can get pregnant and baby comes down through the fallopian tube and has to have implantation. Well, if there's just scar tissue in there, you don't get implantation. And again, you would spontaneously miscarry if implantation can't occur. Yes, Rhonda?
Yes. I've heard several times recently this idea that there are less abortions. And when people say that, they're evidently not counting, because there's probably no statistics on this, how many people are aborting through the morning after pill and through abortifacient contraceptives? So those two techniques are abortion, but because it's so tiny, somehow even we don't count that.
I don't know if those are counted or not, but overall, the number of abortions has decreased in the last 10 years. There is more and more of awareness. I think especially with the sonograms that are being used both at the pregnancy centers and just through word of mouth. I think young women are starting to realize, like, oh, you know, my aunt had an abortion and she hardly ever talks about it. I don't think it was such a good thing.
Yeah, but that means just what you're saying means that no one is counting in all those abortions, which are probably millions more.
Right,
abortifacient.
right. Yeah,
So-
oh, the abortifacients of contraceptive abortifacients are definitely not counted in the statistics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so are we really just whistling in the dark saying, I mean, we're glad that there are less of these violent abortions, which the other ones are less violent,
Yeah,
but we're acting as if they're not real.
right, right. There's, you know, then we just have to work with what we've got. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Those aren't counted in this. I'm sure they're not counted at
But
all.
that
in the
might be the
statistics.
reason why there are less of these other abortions, that given the grisliness and horror of this, that people have some sense of, they're choosing to be very careful to use abortifacient contraceptives and morning after pills.
I tend to think not, because the contraceptives that the young women are using today are extremely, extremely potent contraceptives. A lot of them get they're under the arm, they put them in, and they actually put you into what's considered like almost 10 times a normal pregnancy state. And so it's with these new things, it's almost impossible to get pregnant. It's almost, but they make a young woman miserable. You know, picture a woman pregnant times 10. You know, you're bloated and you're cranky and your libido goes right out the window. So they get to stop, you know, from getting pregnant, but they're extremely miserable, and it totally messes up their hormone system. You know, when their system hasn't even, you know, gotten started yet, and the body's just starting to regulate. So they're horrible.
Okay, so
Yeah.
will this push women toward the morning after pill?
It's possible. It's possible.
Because that doesn't have those side effects.
Right? It's possible.
I don't know. I'm starting to disagree with that. If we can prove to them that it's a person at conception, then something like the morning after pill, which is causing them to die after conception, it seems like we could start pushing the next step if we win that first one.
The sad thing about the morning after pill is that, you know, we don't know then whether it causes an abortion or not, because conception doesn't usually take place the morning after. So if you can stop it before conception takes place, the sad thing is you don't know. You know, usually conception may not take place anywhere from 1 to 5 days, you know, from the morning after. It's very rare for conception. The sperm just don't swim that fast, and the egg has to be there. So everything has to be perfectly lined up for conception to even occur the next day. So somebody may, you know, down the line, they use the morning after pill, and then they come to their senses and think that they aborted when they didn't abort, or they did abort when they thought they did. You know, becomes a real mess. Yeah. I mean, I've heard of young women who have gone for abortions who then, you know, subsequently killed themselves, only for the family to find out they weren't actually pregnant at all. You know, they weren't pregnant, that they thought they were pregnant, and they were told they were pregnant, and they paid for an abortion, but there was no baby there. So, you know, it's a real messy business, the abortion industry. I mean, when you have an industry that's fueled by the pornography industry, you know you have a messy business going on. A business that's not required to have any records, or business that's not required to do any follow-up. I mean, a woman goes in for an abortion at 11 o'clock in the morning at Planned Parenthood, and they close at 3. If she starts hemorrhaging or has a problem at 6 o'clock at night, and she calls them, she's going to get a reporting that says, go to the ER. We're closed. We're done. We're done. She also signs a form when she goes in that says even if she dies, they're not responsible for anything. not responsible for anything, and they won't do an abortion unless she signs that form. Won't do it. So, there's no responsibility. So you've got a really messy industry on all sorts of levels. Even if you're pro-choice, you shouldn't like the way the abortion industry is run. I really want to stress that. Even if you're pro-choice, you shouldn't like the way the abortion industry is run, because it's not run with the health of women in mind at all. It's a very lucrative business. You had a question? Go ahead. Yes.
Well, the Center for Disease Control keeps track of all these abortions.
Yes.
So they know. So yeah, surgical abortions are going down, but the statistics I recently read said there's between 10 and 12 million chemical abortions in the United States every year.
Right.
So they are tracking these things. And it says right on LO1 and on Plan B, right on the label.
Well, Plan B, they can
This
track.
may inhibit implantation. That's an abortifacient.
Right. Right.
Right on the label. The FDA's have done longitudinal studies that proves.
Yeah, these at-home things are very scary because, it's like, well, you're allowed to use it up until this point in time, but, who's monitoring, you decide a young woman gets frantic and she takes it, not the day after, but 2 weeks later, and you don't know how they're being used once something gets taken home. Yes.
Well, can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
So I went around to the pharmacies around Connecticut after the federal government made this legal. And you go into any pharmacy, you can find Plan B and LO1 right on the shelf. Anyone can buy it.
Right.
10-year-old could buy this stuff if they wanted to. They have the money.
Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering about the process of abortion going in and sucking the baby out. I've heard that could be actually you talk about the scar tissue side inside, but also I've heard it can be very risky for internal bleeding.
Yes.
And those causes.
Yeah, because if they perforate the uterus and turn the suction machine on, other things can get sucked out. Bowels can get sucked out. Other body parts can get sucked out. Yeah, so it's not a simple procedure, and it's certainly not risk-free. And we're going to take a look at that a little bit more tomorrow. Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering, after you've mentioned that human person is a continuum, kind of stuff like now you still use the B. Is it being in the womb? BIW. Still call it being in the womb instead of a person in the womb.
Yeah.
It's because you're already kind of convinced us that it is a continuum. That life is a continuum. It doesn't
Well, pro-life is going to call it a baby. And even with the continuum, pro-choice is still going to call it a fetus. And I'm going to use being in the womb interchangeably between both of those positions because it is a being in the womb. But I'm going to use it interchangeably to kind of have a neutral ground occasionally for me to go to so that I don't either have to take the pro-choice stand or the pro-life stand to show you this from a neutral standpoint. Because I don't want you to be pro-life because I push pro-life down your throat. I don't want somebody to be pro-choice because I push pro-choice down. I want to be able, in this 10 hours that we have together, to show you both sides as strongly as possible. That's my goal, is to show you both sides as strongly as possible, the way that side wants to be represented, and have you use your own reason, your own ability to think, and to compare the arguments. We're going to look a lot more at both arguments tomorrow and how they both answer questions. And tomorrow, sometimes if I'm presenting the pro-choice side, I'm going to call it a fetus. When I'm presenting the pro-life side, I'm going to call it a baby. And sometimes I'm going to hide out and call it a being in the womb. So you'll still see me go back and forth because I want you to look at the arguments. I want the people out there listening to this to form their own opinion on the facts, on the arguments. Look at the arguments on this side, look at the arguments on the other side, and continue to say, what is the being in the womb? Is it just a fetus, which in Latin happens to mean little one, which is kind of interesting, but is it a fetus, an embryo, a non-personal plant-like thing that suddenly pops into a person at some point in time? Or is it a baby? Is it a baby? And I don't want to push my ideas on you. My point in being here isn't to push my personal ideas on you, because quite honestly, what I personally happen to think really doesn't matter, because I don't have like some kind of hold on the truth. So I was saying earlier, the truth is we uncover truth, we discover truth. So I'm not here, if I happen to be pro-life, I'm not here to push my pro-life views on an audience. If I happen to be pro-choice, I'm not here to push my pro-choice views. And that's what we really tried to do in the book, Understanding Abortion. It doesn't take a stand. The idea is for you to think as a rational being and look at the arguments. Don't be afraid to, so many times pro-choice people, they don't want to look at pro-life arguments. Don't confuse me with the facts. But pro-life people are the same way. I don't want to hear your pro-choice arguments. I don't want to understand where you're coming from. And so in this country, we have 40 years of these two furiously angry sides just arguing like this. They just go right by each other. And like, that's got to stop. We've got to look at each other's arguments. Because I found when people are really open to looking at the arguments, maybe it's a fetus, maybe it's a baby. Let's look at this being in the womb. Let's just stay relaxed. Let's not get too upset here. Let's really look at what the arguments are, what the opponent is saying. People start to think clearly and rationally instead of just with their feelings and emotions. And that's like so important. It's so important. That's why it's important to clearly recognize this is not a religious issue. Because once it's a religious issue, or people get all like hyper, it's religious, life, God's greatest gift, and then you're the atheist who's on her way for an abortion says, well, that's nice, but I don't believe in God. That's just great. Well, what are you going to do with her? Okay? It's not a religious issue. Nobody suggests that sex trafficking is a religious issue. Yet most Catholics, I believe, are against sex trafficking. Anybody here not against sex trafficking? Anybody here not against rape? Well, let me tell you, rape's a religious issue. If you're against rape, it's a religious issue. No, nobody suggests that. Okay? So we want to take this argument against abortion, which has been thrown into the religious realm just because some religious people happen to be against it, but lots of them aren't, including Francis Kissling, Catholics for Free Choice, aren't against it. So we want to take it out of just a religious realm where somebody can just say, I don't need to listen to your arguments because you happen to be a religious person. It's so important to recognize that and to just look at it rationally, like we would any other moral issue: slavery, rape, sex trafficking, stopping at a stop sign. Most religious people believe you should stop at a stop sign. Because why? Because stopping at a stop sign is a religious issue. No, because you just ought to stop at a stop sign because it's a human rights issue. It's a human rights issue. You could kill somebody if you don't stop at a stop sign. Oh, but you Catholics, you all believe in stopping at stop signs, right? Yeah, it's a religious issue. Hello? It's like it's not a religious issue. Moral issues stand on their own. I don't need to believe in God to know I shouldn't kick you or shoot you, or punch you in the face just because I feel like it. I don't need to believe in God to know that a moral issue is a moral issue. So it's so important that we take it out of the religious realm and say to people, no, let's talk rationally. So that's why you'll hear me still say being in the womb. I'm not going to let go of it that easily.
The other side of that is not a religious issue, is that someone might say, listen, it's a woman's issue.
That's right, it's a woman's issue.
You stay out of it.
Right, it's a woman's issue.
So,
So wait a minute, half of the people being aborted are men.
Yeah.
Half of the people being aborted are men. That's not, our little boys, Right, and men have absolutely no say in the abortion issue, even if you're married to the woman and she's 7 months pregnant and she decides she doesn't want this. You have no say in the matter. None. But the minute that baby takes a breath and becomes what? Citizen of the United States, you have what? What happens then?
Civil rights.
You have full responsibility for child payments. Full responsibility for child payments, but no say in the matter beforehand. So we have a huge problem with the legal system, which we'll look at in the next couple of days as well.
Yeah, that all sounds very inconsistent.
Yes.
Will you be talking about the issue of difficult pregnancies, like tubal pregnancies or things like that?
I will talk about tubal pregnancies. But again, well, yes, I will. Yes.
Can you break down your class a little bit? I find it unusual that a secular university would have you teach this class for these many years. Can you kind of break down how the students, are there more women? Are there less men? And how do they, what is their thinking at the end of your class in general?
Okay. Well, first of all, I didn't teach the class at the University of Rhode Island. Dr. Schwartz did. Dr. Stephen Schwartz. He's taught it for 40 years. I met him taking a class there. I think it was probably around 1979 or 1980. I took my first class with him. I happened to be very pro-choice, not very pro-choice at the time. I was what I call default pro-choice. It was just the nature of the culture until I saw the life or death brochure, and that was the end of that. But the classes tend to be, mixed classes. We usually had about 60 kids per class, 60 students between the ages of, 18 and 21 or so. It's usually a mix. Usually I would say about 10% were very pro-life. We usually surveyed them before and after. 10% were very pro-life. Another 10% I would call very pro-choice, very clear. And then there was 80% in the middle who were generally what I call pro-choice by default. They hadn't really thought about the issue wasn't important to them. They sort of knew what abortion was about. But a woman had a right to, it was the law of the land, a woman has a right to her body. And, so there's just sort of pro-choice by default. So that's kind of how I would define the class.
And how do they generally end up? Was there
how do they generally end
movement
up?
in
I
those
would
numbers?
say of the 80% in the middle, most say they're more pro-life. I'd say 50% of those become pro-life. The other 50% are no longer comfortable with the idea of abortion as a simple thing, as an easy answer. They realize it's a much more complicated issue than they thought it was when they came in. And I would say about half of the people that were very pro-choice when they came in also moved towards pro-life. It's no longer a simple issue. Once it's not feelings and slogans being kind of slammed back and forth, but you take a look at the pictures, you take a look at the status of the being in the womb, what's going on, the heart's beating, the possibility of pain is very bothersome to a lot of people. Then it becomes a very much more difficult issue to just say, oh, she should just get an abortion. They start to realize that it's not, like I said before, deleting a file. It doesn't just easily go away. When they start to hear the stories of women that have a difficult time, like Maggie that I talked about yesterday, saying, I made this choice and I can't live with it. I can't live with it. You start to realize that even if you're pro-choice, well, maybe this isn't a simple solution for women. And so generally there's a movement towards the pro-life side, at least partially. And like I mentioned, even at the Life and Choice Conference in Princeton, we had 400 people there, 200 on both sides from really all over the world. And most of those people, at least on the moral issue, not legally, but on the moral issue, most pro-choice people do not want anything to do with abortion after 20 weeks. Or right around 19 weeks, because they really do feel that pain and viability, the ability to survive outside the womb, that those are morally significant. They do feel that pain and viability are morally significant. Now legally, they still want to keep it because they don't want the slippery slope of abortion rights to go away altogether. But morally speaking, most normal people don't want anything to do with abortion. And we find in the classroom, and even in sort of anybody I've talked to in general, most people have no idea that Roe v. Wade said abortion was okay through the entire pregnancy. Most people think that abortion is legal only in the first trimester. Most students think it. So they're usually pretty shocked to find out. So even when I say, that 80% that's by default pro-choice, they're pro-choice because they think abortion is only available in the first trimester. Usually they're pretty shocked to find out that people have abortions in the second and third trimester. So it's interesting at a secular university. And the book is basically with a lot more details in it, exactly what we do in the classroom. There are no religious arguments in there. There's no need to bring in God. It's a moral issue. It's a human rights issue. And you can take a look at both sides. The great thing about the book is, again, pro-life people don't want to read pro-choice books. Pro-choice people don't want to read pro-life books because we've already made up our minds. And so the two sides never talk to each other. Two sides just never talk to each other. And so it's really great. Nothing like, there's pro-life books out there, there's pro-choice books out there. And there's some that say, they have a couple of essays, but there's none where the two issues are put together, civilly speaking to each other. And you're free to look at both sides and not have one side or the other kind of, pounded into you. You can look at the arguments like a rational person and come to a rational understanding of the arguments. So that's what we did. And that's why, you can give it to anybody. Yes.
Has there been debates about this at universities, the pro-life?
There used to be debates. There used to be debates. And Planned Parenthood, and usually somebody from Planned Parenthood came, so somebody like Steve Schwartz would do the pro-life side, and someone like in Rhode Island, it was Marianne Sorrentino years ago, head of Planned Parenthood, would come and debate. And the debates often didn't go well over the years for the pro-choice side. I was at one debate once where the person doing the pro-choice side was doing so badly that Dr. Schwartz stopped the debate, went over to this woman and said, "I have some better arguments for your side." And gave her the better pro-choice arguments because she didn't know them. And she was like, "Thank you." And then the debate went on. She kind of looked them over and, okay, we'll continue the debate now. Because the pro-choice side just didn't know their own side. But that's not always, that can be true of pro-life people. I know plenty of pro-life people that their only argument against abortion is God says it's wrong. That's going to do you a lot of good, in a debate. Or I don't feel it's right, or it's a baby. Well, yeah, but it doesn't have reasoning, consciousness. What are you going to do with that? It doesn't seem to have any attributes of what we know as a person. Well, if they don't know the difference between being and functioning, you're not going to get very far. Yeah.
Yeah, so debates are not.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I lost track there. So, so there used to be debates, but there haven't been debates in a long time. People, they just don't want to go there. Yes.
Yeah, I know it's common in the world today to rate a person according to what he does or what he possesses. My concern is with the functionality approach that you brought to compare a being and what the person does, being a person and the function a person performs. You said something like that. The functionality argument.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, you're
being a person and functioning as a person.
Right, are two different things.
Yes, I know, but still, you can. The world today, a person is rated based on what that person is able to do or is capable of doing.
Right. Right.
Not many people would find it so attractive to argue that for the fact that he's a person in the womb, he's a being in the womb. It will not sound so attractive with the argument of what a person does, because now let's assume being a student, and let's assume you being the professor. We don't have the same, even though we are still human beings, but because of the change of roles,
right,
and what we do, we cannot be treated equally somehow.
Right. But we have the same ontological dignity. We have a different dignity as far as gain dignity. I'm trying to think of the word for that. It's escaping me. So we gain dignity. We possess different types of dignity based on our station in life. You're a student, I'm a professor, that kind. But our ontological dignity is identical, and it's identical to a small child.
Yes, but in our society, we don't really approach a person based on this ontological dignity. We are only approached from
Right.
functionality.
Right, but morally we do. Like, I can't decide, to take your kidneys just because you're a student. So on moral issues, we do approach it that way. On moral issues, we do approach it that way. On business issues and social issues, there's definitely a difference. But on how I treat you as a human being, I have to treat you as a human being the same, whether you're a student or a homeless person or a 2-year-old child or an 80-year-old person. I have to treat you as a person on that level. And I think generally speaking, with Gert's rules, we have that in mind across the board, regardless of our station, how we function. I can't kill you, I can't cause pain, can't deprive you of freedom. Those kind of things hold across the board regardless of how functioning is. Now, granted, I think we are slipping away from that more and more. We're certainly seeing a problem with the elderly, how the elderly are treated. Certainly seeing a difference with that. But that's not surprising if we're treating the youngest members of society as if they have no ontological dignity. It's really not surprising that when you get older and you start not to function as well, that you're going to, and again, the functioning thing, you start to see that we're not going to treat them with the same ontological. We're seeing the problem at both ends of the spectrum. It's just far more pronounced still, for the preborn than it is for the elderly, but it's getting there. Or for the disabled. I've often said, I don't know why we built all these handicap ramps, because pretty soon there's not going to be any handicapped people, because the prenatal testing gets rid of them all. So, there is a case of functioning where somebody says, this is a baby, but it's got a problem. So, the functioning is an issue. But at the same time, it's an argument, because we all know that when we're under anesthesia, we don't have the functioning of a person, but I can't harvest my organs, I hope,
Kiki, do you want to tell them it's almost 8:30?
We have a
Give them a little review of what's up and coming, preview of coming attractions.
Coming attractions is tomorrow night. We're going to really dialogue on some of the deeper, questions. When does a person begin? What do we do if we're in doubt? The Supreme Court said we are in doubt. That was really what they said. We don't know what this thing is. Doctors, lawyers, philosophers, nobody can agree. So they said, who are we? The Supreme Court justices. We don't know anything about biology and persons. Who are we? We don't know what this thing is. We're in doubt. So we're going to kind of take a look at what should we do when we're in doubt. And pro-choice is going to say one thing and pro-life is going to say the other. We're going to look at, when does life begin? How can you say that life begins at conception? Are there any reasons for that? Well, God said so, or the church said so. Well, that's not going to hold water, okay? So you've got to have reasons. You've got to have reasons, and pro-life does have reasons. And pro-choice has reasons as well why they say that can't possibly be. So we're going to start to look at some of the deeper questions like that tomorrow. And then we're going to start to go into the legal question. So, and then the last night, we'll look more at some of the personal stories with my work at Problem Pregnancy, where we worked with, I think it's about 5,000 or 6,000 women over the course of 20 years. And I'm going to share some of those stories. What makes an unwanted pregnancy in the first place, and then what makes an unwanted pregnancy stay an unwanted pregnancy. So we're going to look at some of those more personal issues associated with abortion. So that's the plan over the next few nights. So, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
ask her probably 101. Well, I'm gonna ask her now, but it'll just be 101. And I'm sure probably any theological students here could answer this, but like ontological would be what my friends would call a $10 word. To someone who has no idea what that means, you have a short, simple way of saying this is what it means. Let's continue on with the actual discussion.
Ontological dignity is the dignity you have just in your very essence. By being a human being, you get it. Everybody gets it. Everybody has it.
Okay.
It cannot be taken away from you.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Even if you're Adolf Hitler, you still have ontological dignity. Because the problem is if you start to say, well, oh no, he's too evil, he's lost his ontology. It's either C.S. Lewis or Chesterton, and I always get them mixed up. One of them said it was possible for a person to lose even their ontological dignity, because it's so depraved. The problem is, it's like, once you start to say, well, Hitler lost his ontological dignity, he has no dignity, he's lower than an animal. Well, then what about this guy? Well, he's almost as bad as Hitler.
Yeah, I definitely see
Well,
what
what
you're
about this guy? And, and then, after a while, you don't like your neighbor, and he's lost his ontological dignity too, so you just shoot him. So basically, people have held that your ontological dignity holds across the board, just by the very fact that you are a human being, that you're made in the image of, we would say because you're made in the image and likeness of God. But the very fact that you are this supreme rational being or capable of being that, you have that. And then there's, what's the next one? Acquired dignity, the things you acquire from your learning.
Right.
Acquired dignity. And then there's dignity associated with your character. So hopefully, just by your character, you have more of this other type of dignity that Hitler had. Right. You let go of it. So then other types of dignity, and then you get dignity just by your position. Like Barack Obama has dignity just for being president. And if you go to see him, it doesn't matter whether you like him, disagree with everything he stands for, he still has the dignity of being president.
That makes sense. Even if you went to a king or queen,
right,
you have to bow.
You bow,
yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So there's that's like a. I should have these words right there. That's like a dignity just by your title,
right.
Regardless of your moral character, regardless if you're a complete jerk, but you're president of the United States.
Right, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
I got it.
4 types of dignity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then these next 2 are minor questions also. Do you cover the whole what you were describing with the paperwork? How you have to sign that if anything happens to you, they can't be sued or not responsible. Do you cover that in these 5 days discussion?
No.
Is that covered in the book?
I don't know if it's covered in the book or not. That's a good question.
Okay, so
Sorry, Phil, just a quick question about the book.
Yes.
Is that all books you have left?
We have more of them.
Because I don't have any money on me. I'll bring money tomorrow.
Okay.
So reserve one.
Yeah, you're welcome to take one and just bring the money tomorrow.
Really?
That's fine, yeah.
I don't know if
That's fine. If you want to take a look at it tonight, you're more than welcome. Yeah, just give it to Rhonda or me tomorrow.
I was thinking you could use that